Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your time. Let's start with the financial crisis in Afghanistan, which led to human crisis. If the situation continues, do you think it will lead to the fall of Taliban?
Well, I would hope that's the case. I mean, it's pretty clear the Taliban are not capable of being an effective government nationwide, or even in the parts they control. They seem even more disorganized than I think most observers thought they would be. They're harassed by ISIS-K, and they're still apparently more interested in going after supporters of the previous regime, settling scores from time gone by, and not running an effective government or taking care of the people. So I do think that it's going to be a very significant decision here to see whether Taliban faces up to the responsibilities they now have, because I think a lot of governments are reluctant to give them any substantial support when every indication we have is that they simply provide for the people who back them and take reprisals on the people who don't.
According to Human Rights Watch, Taliban are killing national Afghan security forces. What can the international community in general and the United States in particular do to stop these killings?
Well, it was one of Taliban's fundamental promises in the negotiations with the United States, that they would not engage in human rights violations, that they wouldn't take reprisals on the former regime, that they wouldn't infringe the rights of women, that they wouldn't interfere with education. I mean, it's a long list of assurances, all of which they have violated. So it seems to me that that Taliban has undercut any claim that it has to legitimacy. And I hope that the United States and others, very quietly now, but are talking to people who don't agree with Taliban running Afghanistan to see if there aren't ways that we can be helpful to them. I mean, I think this is a very difficult situation. Obviously, among the terrorists themselves, there's no real agreement. And I think it's important that we try and understand exactly what conditions on the ground are. We're not looking to make life harder for the average citizen of Afghanistan, but what we certainly don't want to do is strengthen the Taliban's control.
You mentioned inclusive government. Why do you think Taliban resist to bring reform to their cabinet, include women, include other minorities, include technocrats? Why do you think so?
Because I think they were lying from the beginning. I don't think they ever had any intention of forming a broad government. I think they believed that once the United States and NATO forces left, that they could take full control. Perhaps even they didn't realize how quickly it would come, but it's been their longtime strategy that they could go back to where they were 20 years ago. So I'm not surprised. I think it's just another example of their bad faith. And it's one reason that I think there's absolutely no merit at this point for any government to recognize Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. They don't merit that reward, which is what it is. And I think if we are going to exert any influence over them, it's by withholding some of what they think that they're entitled to.
Mr. Ambassador, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution to delay the selection of who will represent Afghanistan in United Nations. And Mr. Isakzai is told to continue with his assignment. What is your take on that?
Well, I think in the UN, whenever something is very controversial and there doesn't seem to be a clear majority, they just punt the question down and hope that the events in Afghanistan will answer it for them. But I think this is also an opportunity, also considering the Afghan embassy in Washington, and I think in capitals in Europe as well, that really speaks for the Afghan people, not for the Taliban, that this might be an important channel of communication so we can find out more about what exactly the conditions are inside the country.
China is heavily lobbying for the government of Taliban. Do you think China's support will help empowering Taliban?
Look, I think the Chinese have two objectives. Number one, to make sure that extremism doesn't spill into Xinjiang province and others where they're engaged in cultural genocide against the Uyghurs and against religion in general across the whole country. But also they want to make sure that the retreat of the United States and NATO is turned into something more strategically important. I think China would love to have a very solid relationship with the Taliban government because it would help China project its power economic, politically across Central Asia. So I'm very concerned, and I do think China will lobby heavily in places like the United Nations in support of Taliban.
Mr. Ambassador, you were the national security advisor for during President Trump's presidency, and you had access to intelligence reports. There are reports that Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzadeh, the leader of Taliban, is dead. Do you know anything about it?
Well, I don't. I mean, there are a lot of reports out there that are conflicting at the moment. I mean, I don't underestimate the conflict with ISIS-K, but I also don't underestimate the possibility of political arrangements shifting for all kinds of reasons inside the country. Obviously, Taliban has not established itself stably in power, even with access to all of the weapons from the Afghan National Army. So you can't rule out, I think, a period of instability and reprisals and internecine conflict among the various terrorist groups.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.